Now what we're looking at here is economic growth and constraints. Now the question we're asking for is raising the point of what creates economic growth. In which we're in a situation of how do we achieve downward growth, but how do we get that growth that goes up? It's going like this, which is not bad. Is it doing this? And that's bad. Is it doing this? And that's good. Now remember, economic growth can create standard of livings, income, stuff like that, jobs. The more growth you have, the more of those things you have. A lot of people talk about constrained economic growth, which we'll address. I tend to dislike it, the idea of restraining it, because it has an impact on the population. It makes the rest of us live poorly. And I admit I like human beings living well. Okay, the question comes, how do we create economic growth? Now, general wish is here I've created the PPF. We have food and textiles or food and other consumer goods, and we have a PPF. Let's do the simple outline thing here. And you see the PPF here runs along, and that's the edge of it, that red PPF. But on the edge, we're using everything we have efficiently. And so the question comes, how do I go from B? How do I create growth to go from B to A and make this a new PPF? How do I achieve that? Because that's what we want, because then I can have more food and more goodies. My people can live better. We can have a chicken every pot, 2 chickens every pot. We can have bigger houses and stuff, like whatever we want to have. And a lot of people say people should have less. When people say people should have less, what 99% of the time they mean the peasants should have less, and not them. They're holy and pure. The other people should do that, and then they feel superior, good, for the fact of they made other people lose, and they have it. So we will be constrained by limitations. Again, I'm always cautious when we say limitations, because there are limitations. I'm very cautious because, again, this red line was our first constraint. What do? We let this one right here, down here, where B is located on. That was our constraint. Then we figured out, how do we expand our frontier? How do we create more growth? Ag supply curve is the full capacity to produce. Now, the ag supply represents our ability to produce. Now, if we look at the ag supply, we talked to Keynesian model, and the Keynesian model said, okay, our ag supply curve, when it's down here, we have surplus resources, land, labor, capital, free technology, stuff like that, which we're going to get to a bit when we do more growth. And then we start getting constrained. In other words, what may happen is we go here and we start getting constrained. We're getting towards the edge of the PPF. And then when you have that nice, stiff straight line here, we basically we hit the wall. We're on the edge of the PPF. So then the question comes, we said before, how do I move it outward? Because then when it shifts outward, let's see if I can use. No. When it shifts outward, when the whole line shifts outward, it looks something like this. We go, and then we have a new. So the ag supply curve is shifting outward. That's part of growth, because we have to increase our capacity. See, because when we get to the straight up and down PPF, we're using all our resources, a number of resources. How we create more growth, more capacity, more ability to produce, so people can live better. I'm not being cruel here. I just did the silliest thing. I reached for this is the mouse pad. I was reaching for my mouse pad computer. So that's the question comes: how do I shift out the ag supply curve? How do I make it such so we can relieve the constraints, either our technology, our resources, our human capital, our physical capital? How can we expand those outward? Because it relieve those binding constraints. Now, as I said, we have to be efficient. If we're not efficient, we've always assumed efficiency here. If we lose efficiency, which we're going to talk about a number of times, we could be well inside our PPF. And the reason we're well inside our PPF is we've made very inefficient decisions, particularly as we grow on the governmental level. So given these concerns, how do we create growth? How do we produce and make it such that we can live better, we can have more? How do we get that place, they want to do better? How do we reach, not even being, funny, how do we reach ours? Where everything's great, wonderful, and stuff like that. How can you achieve that? And now keep in mind, every president wants things to be better. Some of them may be full of googie boogies, and I don't care which one you think is full of googie boogies. They all disagree about how to do it. They all wanted to make the country better off. How do we make the country better off? And the means they will use and what they think will work differs. It's a big clash between them in terms of what I think will work, how it'll work. And remember, sometimes they're politicians. Politicians can be, suffer from a form of, bad normative where I want to be this way because it should be this way. Because it makes me feel good and it'll make me look good. And so they'll do that a lot of times. Because remember, they don't pay. Politicians in general don't pay for the mistakes, but particularly the bureaucracy doesn't pay for its mistakes. Okay. With growth, the point is often made the devil is in the details. That what I'm trying to do is make something better. Now you have this quote from Gandalf here when Frodo offers Gandalf the ring and says, "Take it, I'm giving you." He goes, "No, tempt me not, for he would take it from the desire to do good, but through him would do great evil." And that is, a lot of times the devil is in the details. The devil's going to catch with the details. You have a grand idea. The idea seems great and wonderful. You want to have it. In the idea are seeds of evil that subvert them. A lot of people who did fantastic evil in the world wanted to make it theoretically a better world. But to make their better world, they were willing to totally wipe out lots of people because the good idea justifies anything. In other words, from a Christian perspective, they've relieved themselves from the law of God because the law of God gets in front or in the way of their good ideas. So we're going to get rid of that. It's preventing me from achieving my self-actualization or whatever it is. And you will have that. It's crippling. So we have to be careful with them. And then this goes back to the debate we talked before. And these are two different questions. They're very important. Is the government going to intentionally do good or unintentionally evil? And then this is very important. Does the government seek good, right principles, morality, stuff like that? Or is the government going to be unintentionally evil? Now remember, the government lacks an efficiency motive. Now being inefficient doesn't necessarily make you evil. It can make you very wasteful. But what if your government, I apologize, I haven't, find the stuff to fight a cold sore I have, so I apologize. And they're like, he's a crazy guy. Yes, I am. But hey, it keeps me awake. But what is my government going to seek to do? What is its nature? And then, does the government recognize good and evil? And this goes back to knowing reality, and good and evil used to be a very simple thing. You can know good, you can know evil. Do we recognize it? Do we deal with it? And again, I'm not being cruel, but I'm pointing out the difficulty here. It's because the fact of, if I don't know what good and evil is, how do I know then what's corruption? The line I picked on before is, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Well, no, not really. But someone uses that because they want to have people they believe in what the terrorist is doing so well that they want to hide it. So does the government recognize good and evil? In terms of, and that becomes very important. Heck, the abortion bill is a great example of, when we say abortion is a good thing, we're not recognizing evil, because why? We're saying, well, people have the right to kill a child. And now we're back to the killing. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, which we were just outlining a second ago. Again, skulls and human bones packed from the killing fields of Cambodia. And so a lot of times we want to create such a better, more just world. They wiped out tens of millions, hundreds of millions of their own people, because what they were trying to do justified any action. They got rid of good and evil, because they said, what, a human being is worth nothing. And keep in mind, these were systems created. These were systems created for the betterment of the small people, the little guy, the small fellow. They were created for them. And they did what? they killed and slaughtered the small guy. They slaughtered the small guy. Enemy, anybody said, in Cambodia, having glasses was a criminal offense. That showed you had, oppressive Western ideas. What? It's glasses. But they did that. A communist professor in the United States, in fact, he'll be like, oh, well, no one studies communism in the United States. They don't do it. Oh, they know the glories of communism, but study this. Like, dude, are you smoking crack? He's either lying or stupid. I'm not sure which. In fact, if you go to any major university in the United States and you're doing English, you're getting communism. If you go to most education programs, you're getting communism. The English programs that read, Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto as great works of 19th century literature. Our programs have, can't talk about communism. And he sits there and he goes, oh, look what the Soviets did. The Soviet Union is so great. Look how far they grew and how great they've done the communism. Well, one we talked about already, they faked the numbers, which we're going to get to again in a minute. They lied. They lied vociferously. It's like he's like saying, she's like, keep in mind, the Soviets never did this like he's thinking they did. Oh, they had this great giant growth rate. No. They were achieving this. And they were achieving that with lots of dead people. And they had a resource-rich country. The Soviet Union was first in almost every major resource. And the communists took over that country. So they weren't exactly, they were swimming resources, and they wasted them lavishly. And so it's like, yeah, US and Japan outstripped the Soviet Union easily, and they did it without making all the dead people. And no, we're not talking fantasy dead. Like someone says, at least people died. That was capitalism person. It's like, no, see, you can't find the Sea of Skulls in the United States, or even France and stuff like that, or Britain and stuff like Cambodia, yeah, Communist China, yeah, they had them too. Soviet Union, yeah. And so what they're doing, they're measuring by different standards. Very dangerous. Okay, items that create or inhibit economic growth. How we create economic growth, how do you inhibit? John Henry, a steel driving man. Now, why do I have that up there? Way back when, 170 years ago, they did railroads by dudes like John Henry driving a spike into the ground. It's cool. You love the story. It's a nifty thing. It's very inefficient. Just like here, we have steel making by machines, steel compressing machines that can evenly, in other words, they evenly apply pressure and they make the steel uniform. Before then, you'd have to hammer it. And that depended really on a blacksmith knowing the feel of the iron, which is very variable and not being cruel. How do we create economic growth? Now, the first thing to create economic growth is data, which goes back to we talked before, observation, theory, more observation. We talked about North and South Korea. We collect data. We need to know what works. We need to know, and our data must be real. Our data must be real. It must be functional. Our data cannot be fake or false or anything. It must be real data. Because we want to do observation. What does it look like? Here is poor. Here is rich. Whatever they are doing, I like. Whatever they are doing, I do not like. So that's very important. We're accumulating data to figure things out. Observation, collecting data, leads to some theories, how fails these policies, and then more observation, figure out what works. And so we're constantly doing that. Okay, there is absolute comparison, which we talked GDP growth and stuff like that, which is how are we doing compared to set goals. So for the United States, I mentioned before, because of immigration and population, our real GDP has to pass 2% a year to achieve the growth rate we need to have. We must hit 2% a year. And that's just to make everything even. Relative comparison. How are we doing compared to nations like ourselves? I mentioned before, and during the recovery from the Great Recession, we grew at less than 2%. Normally, when recovering from such a deep recession, we grow at 3.5. So we should have been going at 3.5 plus. We grew at less than 2%. That's bad. But the Europeans and Japanese, who also had the Great Recession, they were coming in at 1%, 1.5, 0.2. In other words, they also had very anemic growth rates. And that's relative compared to how you're doing compared to people like yourself, people the same stage of development, people you're doing things like that. That's why when you do studies, you probably don't compare a 17-year-old boy to a 97-year-old woman, because they're entirely different. I'm not being cruel. I mentioned before, and this is an example of bad data or just stupidity. I'm going to say stupidity because it's stupid, defying reality. Several years ago, a woman in Montana died when she went to the hospital. I believe it was Montana. It may have been I don't know. When she went to the hospital, and she said she was a man. And so the laws at that time required you recognize her as a man. The hospital policy, you recognize her as a man. So since it was filled out saying she's a man, the person looking at things says, this is a man. These kind of pains do not exist in a man unless there's something else. Instead, what it was is there was uterine collapse and damage and stuff like that. So the person died because, I guess, you didn't recognize reality. And not being cruel, I feel for the person. Over time, how do you do over time? How does your country improve and change over time? In other words, you can look good at the moment, and then something happens over time. I got a few examples here, and these are movements over time. Gives you an idea of what are good policies, what are bad policies, stuff like that. For example, East Germany, which, the part of Germany is Eastern Germany, was once the richer part of Germany. In other words, its per capita income was 15% higher than what we call Western Germany. 15% higher in 1939. In other words, it was the richer part of the area. When the Berlin Wall fell and Germany reunified, East German income, per capita income, compared to West Germany, was about 1/3 of it in 1989. And that's kind of a kind estimate. It's 1/3. How can you go 15% higher? And in fact, you didn't even go, you did what? You went down. Okay, data, whatever East Germany was doing, because remember, East Germany, Germans, West Germany, Germans. So the East Germany was doing probably really blanks eggs. The stuff the West Germans was doing probably better than what the East Germans was doing. Doesn't mean the West Germans can improve. It just means the East Germans are out to lunch. Argentina, for over 50 years until we get to up to 1940, it was for the first half of the 20th century. Argentina had a top five. One of the top five countries per capita income from turn of the previous century, 1900 to 45. In other words, they were up there with all the richer countries. They were up there with the Australians, the Americans, the Canadians. They were doing good. By 2000, they were 48th. They slid. They slid downwards. They were basically standing still, not really changing much, and countries are passing them. Lots of countries are passing them. But they used to be first in Latin America. In fact, I said they were one of the top. They were one of the top five. We go back 120 years ago. They were a top five economy. Cuba went from third. In other words, when Cuba had its revolution, Cuba was third in per capita GDP in the Western Hemisphere, behind the United States and Canada. By 2010, they were just ahead of Haiti, which is a country that's broken down in basic civil war. Good job. not being cruel and pointing out the reality of it. A sad thing, and I use this as an example of perfect being enemy of the good, people lying to achieve their end, stuff like that, go back to the economy, but they want to be this other way. In South Korea, they're often taught that the reason Korea is divided is the fault of the United States. That the North Koreans were doing just as good as South Koreans, just fine, it's the United States' fault. So the schools either teach North Koreans is good, or if anything bad's happening, it's the Americans' fault. We didn't occupy North Korea. We didn't dictate their economic system. We didn't dictate their political system. We just ran what they were doing. Now, they made their economic and, system, stuff like that, totally dysfunctional. But, so we have to be careful. But then the South Koreans believe the lies that comes. We have to be careful about the perfect being the enemy of the good. We do not compare reality to fiction perfection. We compare reality to what would exist if it wasn't there. Here's a funny one, in which a country lied to itself so much it didn't even realize it. In fact, this one became one of the reasons, I attempted the field paper that said it was rejected, which made me very sad. I mean, I was right, but it made me very sad. There were lies about, now CBS TV didn't like President Reagan, most media didn't, and they wanted to lie about him. So they had a 2-hour documentary, kind of like when HBO did a documentary about, when that South Korean airliner was shot down. The Soviets didn't know. We knew they didn't know, but we just wanted to make them look bad because we wanted to be mean to communists. Oh, they didn't know. The Soviets knew. When the archives opened up and they got the transcript, the Soviet fighter pilot, he goes, it's another one of those, airlines going, polar route, cutting a little close over the border, which a lot of times they did because it gave her a better approach over time, save a little fuel. And he goes, do you want me to shoot it down? They said, yes, splash him. But according to HBO, the Soviets didn't know. Oh, yes, they did. But they kept lying. So this was done in 1982. This was the CBS did a thing called On Poverty in America, how the Americans are suffering because of Reagan, stuff like that. It was such great propaganda. The Soviets asked CBS if they could show it on Soviet TV because it's really just trash in the American president, stuff like it's going to be great. So they started showing. They never finished it because they started showing it. The state police started to notice that people were getting very upset. The KGB was saying, people are getting upset from this documentary. Because people in the Soviet Union will look at this documentary saying, these are poor people in the United States. Okay, they're poor. Look at this heater they have. It's belching steam and stuff like that. And the Soviet guy would be like, they have a heater? It actually works? That is hot water coming out of the thing. That's hot. Oh, awesome. Oh, the poor look so good in the United States. And they have just this one bathroom. They have an old bathroom? They have their own bathroom? In the Soviet Union, you may be sharing it with 4 other apartments of people you don't know, and it was 4 other apartments. Not 4 other rooms, not roommate, apartment, you might be sharing a bathroom that way. And those would be what are called middle income or, Soviets were doing that. Sometimes even lower upper. So they were like, what? And then they'd look at this is what they're eating, and they'd look and they'd see chicken. Not just any chicken, you'd see chicken breast, chicken legs, stuff like that. Soviet citizens would be eating like the neck, the feet, stuff like that. We tend to throw away. And so it could get back to Central Committee that this documentary is making the poor in the middle in the Soviet Union very unsettled and upset because, why? The poor in America, the people, everybody in the Soviet Union has been told that, oh, they're suffering so it's so miserable. They all wish they were in the United States. They're doing better than we are. And our own government doesn't realize. I'll tell you something. The government was so used to lying to itself, it didn't realize it was lying. And so systems, governments, ideologies like to lie to suit ends. And the willingness to lie, which is a lot easier doing policy, can add costs to the economy because we don't know what reality is. No one, when we count on the government to provide information, real information, the government doesn't know what the information is because they lie in fake data. Why they lie in fake data? Because it looks better. Okay, gaming numbers. In other words, we talked about this before. We're faking numbers, we're altering things. This is a great example of gaming numbers. The Human Development Index. Like, well, we shouldn't judge by GDP. That's so crass. How do people feel about life? Okay, well, see, GDP is just one. It's just one of them. The index has to control all of that. Wrong one. Oh, here we go. Decent living. My bad. See, decent living. That's just one of them. We have to use all of them. Well, what's life expectancy index? Do we have a long, healthy life? No. Part of long, healthy life is countries would get 30 odd points if you had government-run healthcare. Why is government-run healthcare give you more points? It's run by the government, but is it actually better healthcare? For example, people say, "Oh, the United States gets negative rating because we have a short lifespan." Well, yes, we do, but you know that American Norwegians have a longer lifespan than Norwegians. American Swedes have a longer lifespan than Swedish Swedes. American Finns have more longer lifespan than Finns. English in America have more, lifespan than English in England. And you can go on dozens and dozens of countries in which the ethnics from those countries who are in our country live longer than the ones they left behind. We have a different mix of people. Knowledge. Considering that most education establishments teach people like communism, I don't know if they really have knowledge if they think communism is going to work, and they do. Their generation, a large percentage of them, very large, close to 50%, really believe communism is a better system. It's like, are they snorting coke? Is that part of why people put these things in? They wanted to game the numbers. They wanted to have a result that shows the United States is not the richest, somebody else is. So they gamed it. They faked the numbers, but they put in these things. French president, not even the current one, said, "Oh, we should measure quality of life." What's quality of life? And that's a difficulty. No nation, no people is ever wealthy by lottery or luck. We'll get that a lot of time. Oh, you hit one. Americans so lucky, 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 lucky. Oh, the lucky sectors won't hit you. In fact, that'll infect nations and people. This is oftentimes an excuse for the theories of intellectuals failing. In other words, intellectuals had the theory, the big one. Again, this is communism. This is a communist revolutionary paper, magazine written in the teens of a century ago, talking about how capitalism's a fatted pig's almost done. We're gonna cut it open so we can live well. That's kind of it. But they would do that. Now reality tends to shift bad ideas. Bad ideas don't work, tend to get thrown away by reality because they don't work. And so that is a difficulty. They want something, so they redefine it, especially intellectuals, because they don't like the result. Again, let's go back to lottery and luck, and I apologize. A lot of people say the United States, rich by lottery. Well, why isn't Latin America rich? Oh, they had it so difficult. The Americans around. Well, we until the 20th century, we didn't mess them that often. Even then, it was kind of mellow. Most Latin American countries did not have a knockdown, drag out civil war. That's pretty tough. In fact, the Latin American countries avoided both world wars. Hey, that means you're having dead people and stuff like that. Point here, factoid. U.S. poor. The poor in the United States are about 20% are in the top 5 of the world's population. Our average poor person will have more living space than European middle classes. And that's mind-blowing. Productivity. I'm going to go through productivity. I'm going to save and stop because I'm recording a little late in the day, just so stuff been happening. things are getting to me. Things just I haven't, eaten since early this morning. Productivity is a must. In other words, we've made the assumption till now that you have productivity, that you increase efficiency, you find a better way and the such. Now we're relaxing, saying, do you seek productivity? Does your system and nature of people seek to find productivity? Now, productivity I define is doing more with the same resources to get more goodies. I'm not being cruel. The free market and market economy system automatically generate productivity and efficiency because that's supply and demand. That's what markets do. They find the solution. They find the better way, and markets will find the better way. They improve it. They seek it out. So that's automatic, and that makes it easy. So a market-based economy will automatically have productivity because supply and demand seek productivity. They have no choice. If they seek productivity, you get burned as a firm. You fail. Cool. So, it would automatically say many economists and new classicalists advocate for markets because of its automatic productivity and the creation of output and production. Even some Keynesians will say, yes, government role number 2, if you're going to have markets, make sure they're perfectly competitive markets, make sure supply and demand exist. Even a lot of times in socialism, because we need to know the prices, the actual value of things. Okay, managed economy, social communism, lacking, market dominance, supply and demand dominance, often waste resources. They also will, roughly speaking, the government a lot of times will set prices where they want them because this is better. The mayor of New York, I love him, he's so good. I'll make the rents cheaper. I'll make us have more of this and more of that, and we'll have free grocery stores, and we'll have free subway tickets. And how are you paying for all that? Somebody else will give me money. And so you waste, you consume resources. Managed economy, social communism, and they lack prices to tell you what the value of something is. And lacking the price. I would say, well, it's worth more, it's worth less. What is someone willing to pay tells you the value of the good. I'm not being cool without that. Communist countries often slide 2, 3, when communists exist in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and stuff like that, they would slaughter per person 2 to 3 times the amount of animals the United States would do every year. But wait a minute, I just said, yes I did, that when they looked at poverty in America, the Soviets could not believe the types of meat the poor in America have. The average Soviet didn't have that. They'd have, chicken necks. They'd have chicken feet. It's kind of freaky because they're kind of scaly and weird, and they kind of like, ooh. And they're not strictly scaly, but you get the idea. But they consumed. How? In other words, Soviet factories would say, your factory, you're doing bacon off the pig. And so they basically be killing pigs, just harvesting the bacon, throw the rest of the pig away. American farmers don't do that because you can sell the pig and get money. That is what? That is wasted resources. Especially when there was nothing on the table for it. I mentioned this one in terms of items. This waste resource, China, I use an example. China mines 3.7 billion tons of coal a year. Keep that in mind because due to ecological devastation limitations shortly. But they mine 3.7 billion tons of coal a year, over a third of what the whole world mines. Now, stuff that is green power, stuff, talk about things, Green New Deal and stuff like that, costs consumers 2 to 3 times as much for them. And, definitely, you have to, so yeah, I have to, cost 2 to 3 times as much. That's a minimal estimate. And often the green power things are resource intensive. But the books could, for example, a former student said, Scotland's gone so green. They generate 50% of their power from renewables. Oh, Scotland. Well, actually, they don't. See, the generation potential of the wind and solar in Scotland could theoretically supply 50% of Scotland's power. Except there's a minor problem. On any given day, it only generates about 5% of what you need. No, that's waste. That's what government said waste money. Government tells you waste money. I'm gonna think about wasting money. Ah, there we go. I apologize for being slow. Now, looking at limits to growth, ecological devastation. This is one that we'll be dealing with a few times in micro and macro because don't mind me, I'm pouring myself some Pepsi to get the caffeine and sugar surging in the system. What can I say? But this is one in terms when we look at is we wonder are the limits to growth ecological? When we talk about fourth role of government, third party costs, which is the primary one. The big one is pollution. And this is the RLC. Now, the picture of the RLC on the left is a satellite picture from 1979. Now, there's a black and white photostat you can get from 1961, which when you see this, then all these play, it's all this thing that you see all the white that's soft flat C used to go out like this. In other words, this is a much bigger C. So even by the time you get to here, we are here, this C has already shrunk in area by over 15%. I think it may have even been greater than that. On the right, you see by 20. And so, now what happened here? Now this is straight ecological devastation. The Soviets, communists, in their brilliance of being stupid, of which is still done to this day in Uzbekistan, wanted to grow cotton. Now, this climate south of the RLC is warm enough to grow cotton. It's sunny, all that kind of fun stuff. There's a minor problem. Cotton requires about 35 to 40 inches of water a year, rainfall, to grow. Now, keep in mind, like in the United States, we grow cotton also, for some reason, in Arizona, because the federal government actually pays subsidies to pump water from the Colorado River to Arizona farmland to grow cotton, because lots of sunlight is great for the cotton. This is the fact that you lack the water. Well, the Soviets did this in the RLC. In fact, they still do it. The command economy, heavy and social economy, Uzbekistan still does it because it's one of their primary sources of revenue. Well, see, when they diverted the rivers to go to the cotton, remember this is an area where the rainfall is about 15 inches a year. So they need to make up about 20 to 25 inches a year of rainfall, which means you draw it from the rivers. The river, the water from the rivers is not going in the rivers, it's going into the cotton fields. So not enough water is going into the sea starts to dry up. But as the sea dries up, these salt belts are exposed, and the salt belts winds blow the salt beyond that, because that's a saltwater sea. I remember, creationists have said for a long time, it's a remnants of after the shrinking of the oceans during the flood. That's how it got there. But they pumped water out of it, and so it dried. As it dried, the salt, the sea evaporated. Wasn't enough water coming in. Salt got exposed. Salt got blown the crops. Salt got blown the crops. They needed about even more water to keep the salt from killing the crops and sterilizing the land. But as they pumped more water to do that, the sea shrank more. In fact, the three little nubby things up here are because Kazakhstan, which is kind of like maybe like a border here, and it'd be up this way. Border here. Kazakhstan is doing things because there's some rivers that flow into this side, this end of the sea, and Kazakhstan built a retaining wall so those things could slowly fill up because they want to try to revitalize at least their portion of the sea. And so these things said this damage. Once you've done this, it's hard to do. And we're gonna do a few more examples of it. I attack the Greens here, pick on them, because it's caused by conflicts the Greens do not talk about. The Greens never didn't go back to the 1980s when Chernobyl blew up. The Green Party solution was the fact of it's because the Americans did not give the Soviets advanced nuclear technology. I mentioned before, and I'll mention again, in public journals, the United States military said graphite-powered reactors are dangerous for the reason of what caused Chernobyl. Before it was 3 decades before Chernobyl. We had articles published saying graphite reactors are dangerous for this reasons. It was the Soviets could have gone and got the information saying this is bad. No, it wasn't. But the Greens blamed us. The Greens said the United States should give the Soviets lots of compensation because we hurt them by nuclear power. They blew up their own country. They did that. We didn't do it. But then because the Greens want communistic-like control over the economy. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. Now we can go again. What is get locked on that slide? Because I finished that slide a teeny bit in the last item, saying here's the next slide too, but I was exhausted, so I was running fully, and it's like, oh, well, you were on the slide, and so now we can go through the slide straight. The Fertile Crescent, I'm talking to these years because the Fertile Crescent, everyone's like, you take Western Civ, they talk about Fertile Crescent, they just, now I was kidding, it's like, this was these river valley civilizations, and they were all green and easy and wonderful, and you see pictures of these places, you're thinking, it looks like the apocalypse after the nuclear bombs have been dropped everywhere. How do people think this is wonderful and sweet and kind and great? Who's thinking that? Now, using my hair is not this wild. Just having a chance to get to the bottom. That's it. So I see my hair back so it doesn't go in my head, my face. I keep telling my wife I should just buzz the hair off and just go cue ballish, but she's like, no. I'll help you get an appointment with the barber I usually go to. So I'm complaining about that. I'm married well. Kissing my wife did, but I did. But okay. But what happened? Well, see, this is all river valley civilizations. The rivers flood regularly. The sand is all, I should say sand, the soil is all very soft and fertile. Very easy to plow and improve. It doesn't take much. So you can go in these places, the Tigris, Euphrates, the Indus, the Ganges, the Nile. These things flood every year with those regular monsoony-like rains. They put out several inches of new soil, and it's all soft. Like, I could take this pen, stick it in the ground, walk, and make a deep enough furrow to grow things. Everybody try that out in South Carolina, clay. You need a jackhammer to break that dirt up. You guys know exactly what I mean. I've broken clay down here. When I was in the Army, I broke up clay in Fort Bragg. It's heavy. Okay, it's not Fort Bragg anymore. I don't know what they called it. Oh, that's right. They named after, it's Fort Bragg for some guy who was called Bragg in the First World War, who was just a dude whose last name was Bragg. Now, don't get me wrong. You can say not naming the fort after a Confederate general. I can agree with that. Especially, bad Confederate general. But they had it renamed for something else. And it's like, but no one's using this name. No, they renamed it for a Congressional Medal of Honor winner. It's like, no, it's called Fertile Crescent. When you had the Islamic conquest, it was when Islam came out and the Arabs came out in Islamic fervor, and they conquered all these regions. They did not have property rights, which we're going to talk then. So there's no property rights in Islam. And so you can own, I should say, there's no land property. Land property shared, you had, but you had personal property. You could walk or move or carry was yours. So land would belong to the tribe, or whatever the government sees for, whatever the community says they want to do with it. Whereas a camel, a goat, a sheep, clothing, that's yours because you can carry it with you. Remember, it's the mentality of a nomadic population. So when they expanded out, they freely grazed their goats, sheep, and camels over large areas. So this area over here, which would be what was called the hump, Libya was called that lump there. And that was the primary thing of Libya, what we call like Cyrene now. Which looks like, if you've ever seen pictures of World War II, looks like blasted landscape. At the time of the Romans, This was all plains, and it looked like the Great Plains. It was, or it should be, it looked more like savanna. It was wheat growing region. It was rye growing region. It was oat growing region. This was land that was good. In fact, what would happen here is rains from the Mediterranean would evaporate over the Mediterranean because this was cooler. They'd actually sweep over and rain on these areas, including these areas. But once you had the Islamic conquest, they freely grazed the sheep, the goats, the lambs, and they ate everything down to the nub, and they'd move on to something else to graze. So all that land got exposed to the hot sun, and the land was destroyed. It was sterilized. It was dried out. And that's why you'll have archaeological digs in the middle of here. These deep red archaeological dig right here. And it'll be like, there was once a Roman farm here, and it had, a barn, corrals, a house or something like that. It's in the middle of the desert. How do you have a farm there? Because when the Romans were there, it was grassland. They could farm there. The expansion of the Islamic conquest, goats and sheep and camels grazed over anything, and thus the soil get destroyed. The Australian outback also was once plains, or savanna would be a more proper term because it's warmer than our Great Plains. Well, keep in mind the Great Plains were once trees. Once trees stretched all the way from the East Coast to the Rocky Mountains and through the Rocky Mountains. When Native Americans came, they practiced like the originators, slash and burn hunting. You create a large circle, set it on fire, you leave a little hole, because this whole area is on fire. In fact, with this whole area being on fire, you expect the animals, the only thing they do race through is this hole. And you have men waiting outside the hole with spears, and they stab the creatures you want to stab. The problem is you now create a fire over this large area. The fire burns up the plants, kills them, exposes the soil. The sun comes out, and the sun breaks down the soil, creating in Australia a large inversion effect, the heat of the ground. And if you think about it, it shouldn't be happening this way because Australia is a flag. And there's no real mountains or something that get in the way of winds that would come off of currents, off of oceans, and they should sweep onto Australia and bring rain. They don't because the outback is overheated. That's why in Australia, you got this strip around the edges where people can farm. But because they did that, they damaged it. Now, I laugh about it because you have people say, no, the Aborigines, they are one with nature. Their slash and burn hunting is good for the soil and is perfectly fine and is au natural. No, it's not, but you're making some good excuses. No, you make excuses because I like these people for whatever reason. They don't do any damage. No, just people, they make errors. But, I point that goes back to early lectures where it says, people with special privileges, stuff like that, because they're a certain class, something like that. That's why, and so for in the United States, a lot of people claim they're Native American. It's because of what? It gets goodies. Ecological damage, once done, cannot be easily undone. The whole reason for the fourth role of government is the question of externalities. Yeah, well, let's do the color that matches here. A, remember, make something for B. Now, A is not going to hurt B. Hurting B is bad. Remember, if I hurt B, B will not buy from me again. Don't get me wrong. A lot of corporations get stupid because they get so large that no one worries about offending the customer. You got the new Disney's like the gives. I mean, this guy must be the new CEO. Moira. Oh, I don't get in politics. Anybody who opposes me, that's politics. I don't do culture wars. Anybody who opposes me, that's culture wars. Dude. He even thinks All the movies we've made in the last decade, they've been great, made money. Snow White made money. It's like, huh? The remake of Snow White lost probably $200 million. Now he's violating his fiduciary agreement. In other words, when you're a CEO, you're hired by the shareholders to increase their holdings. He's failing that epically. But with that, keep in mind that's supply demand. In other words, he's directly hurting his customers. The customers won't. Now with externalities, C, who's done nothing wrong, is hurt. And I don't mean like, oh, they said words that hurt me, or it's gonna hurt my feelings, or it's some. No, it's measurably hurt. No, it's C gets cancers or stuff like that. Stuff you can quantify. So remember, for the government, we dealt with externalities. We use defined cost benefit. What's the benefit of pollution reduction? That's what we're going to gain back in measurable benefits, restored sick days, low hospital costs, longest life, stuff like that. We got to get an idea what they are. And we compare it to the cost. We're going to lose all these jobs. It's going to be negatives there. We try to get the balance in our favor. Disputed. The costs are known, but the benefits are what? Don't mind me. I'm walking again to circulate. Old age is tough because as you get older, everything likes to break down slowly. As the old saying goes, old age is a train wreck in slow motion. Which I don't know. Just takes. That's why why does he disappear for the little screen? It's because I'm doing that. I know. It's Captain America shirt. I changed shirt. Everyone a Godzilla shirt already. Disputed again. We know the cost of reducing the pollution. Keep in mind, I'm not being mean here. You know the cost of reducing pollution. We don't know the benefit. A lot of people say it's worth anything when they are not the ones paying. If every Hollywood star were going to lose all their wealth, not just their current income, all their money, and be living on Social Security or something like that for the rest of their lives, and have no assets, nothing, something like that, because of their environmental policy, they would all abandon it. I should say all. 99.9% of them would abandon it. Heck, Gwyneth Paltrow, which is an example, owns an estate, an old, I can't call it a castle. We call it a castle. It's like, no, it's a stone building, but it's got big windows like it had 5 centuries ago when it was made. Well, she is stick thin. I think she's kind of like Taylor Swift. Stops herself too much. Now, again, I'm picking this. I'm using this as an example. She has no problem saying everybody else should cut back, but she likes to keep this building at 80 degrees in the winter. We got these giant windows. They're one-pane windows. This building leaks heat like a sieve. But she what? She wants it 80. So you may be causing more pollution because why? The power you're generating for that. Then there's utility base, which is save the critters. No, it's disputed. We can't tell if she's going to benefit anything by the pollution reduction. With saving the critters, it's just that. What's the value of saving an animal? I'm not being cruel. That is a difficult design. Number of comments just say, just stick with defined cost benefits because that's the one we're doing. Now, I pick on the greens because the greens are, to borrow a Swedish saying, I'm checking, my wife might come in. Do you need something beautiful? But the Swedes have a saying that the greens are like watermelons. They're green on the outside and red on the inside. That's a term Swedes made up decades ago because the Swedes noticed everything the Greens want to do is communist policy. Even though, go back to LLC, that was Soviet, that was communist. Go back to, destroyed cities, toxic waste, people hurting, being intimate, that's communist. Beijing has, the sands. Desertification is now within 60 miles of Beijing. Because why? Governmental policy has failed. But the Greens don't talk about those things. They don't mention it. They don't measure things by the same standard, which is why economists, again, I exclude the economists because they're nuts and they're wrong and they don't care because they lie. Good economists, whatever the degree, whatever they range, will say we must measure by the same standard. We need to know it works. If I'm trying to keep things, I need to know the accuracy. But people lie because they're using this is being used, the environmental policy, to achieve a different objective. Government solutions often causes much or more damage than the disease. I picked on waste and wind and solar, but that's, remember when you make this. Why I was picking on those windmill blades. Those windmill blades, which wear out in a few years, do not decay quickly, and they can decay very toxically. So you're getting basically land dug up everywhere to bury hacked up windmill blades. Remember, these windmill blades are huge. They're several 100 feet long. In fact, it's just. Let's see. I'm just looking up windmill blade. No, I'm not talking about CD. Yeah, up to 350 feet long. Keep in mind, that's the size of a good sized skyscraper. Now, there's not much you can do with these things, so they're hacked up and buried, which is normally back is creating lots more areas. They'll just bury them anywhere, and they're not, because it is green energy, they're not classified as waste, whereas normally you classify these things as what? Waste, because they're done and you bury them. But they don't decay, so basically you're filling up lots of areas with dead windmill blades because they decay and rot very slowly. And if they do rot, which they may not even, they do it so slow, it doesn't matter, they could end up contaminating groundwater, ground soil with what they're made of. In fact, in many cases, if they just break down, you get something worse. They could break down like into little, for lack of a better term, razor flechettes or unbreakable down dust, and then they'll end up in people's lungs and stuff like that, either slice them up or causing new forms of cancer because your body can't get rid of them. That was my difficulty with asbestos, is asbestos get trapped in your lungs and stay there. Okay, now wind and solar also they're resource intensive and they're very wasteful. They generate a lot of pollution in making them. Batteries are very difficult to recycle. They didn't bother recycling them. That's expensive. I know it's wind and solar, that's the storage mechanism. But to provide, say, I mentioned before in class, like windmills, you may have theoretically a 2 gigabyte windmill farm. That's what it could generate in optimal conditions. Well, it usually does about 5 or 10% of its capacity at any given point in time because you're dependent on winds, how much they blow, you don't get the full transfer of energy, all that kind of fun stuff. So it means when someone's running a windmill, I don't have to spend, if I'm replacing a 3, gigawatt plant of using coal, I don't place with 3 gigawatts of windmills. In order to generate the same level of power, I have to replace it with 30 gigawatts of windmills. But then if it's 30, I'm spending 10 times as much. That's not efficient. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's free." It's like, no, you get all the resources in making it. In fact, the government writes massive checks to keep these things alive. Windmills and solar plant cells consume a lot of land. Those things consume land like crazy. I remember, a student, former student of mine said, "Oh, it had a windmill." Well, they sliced in a windmill next to a power plant. Says, "Oh, look, the windmills are so ugly," because people don't like windmills in where they live. It's like, well, yes, it's not one windmill, because his implication is that one mill, half truth, one windmill like that provides as much power as the coal plant. No, it's like, see several thousand or several tens of thousands might be able to, but then you have to write a check for that, and that's why I go to the government. So the government gives them free money to do stuff like that. Okay, the government is mandated when people have windmills, solar cells, they generate a surplus energy. The government mandates power companies must buy the energy from them at 2/3 going rate, so it gives them incentive to want to build these things. So you get a number of them, but because of that, they tend to be a subsidy for the rich. Electric cars, based on fact, in France, they don't do anything to electric cars. They park them in a parking lot and let them rot when they die, because the French government doesn't want to go. France has laws saying when a vehicle something dies, you've got to do an environmental impact on what the vehicle will be on the environment as it decays. Well, the French government didn't bury them, so they said, "Oh, we don't need to check them yet. They're not buried yet." We get this car that's been sitting there rotting for the last 5 years, leaking, green radioactive goo, but you won't investigate because what? It might make the cat, not even the cat, might make the policy look bad. Sadly, a lot of improvement is overlooked. A stunning level of improvement. In fact, one of the things we mentioned, it'll be more micro, but I'll mention here, is look at that upper left corner now. That is 1985, air quality in the United States, sulfur dioxide. And that is in a time period after we'd already been cleaning up our environment stunningly so. In other words, we'd improved so much. And going from them, look at the way the air quality has improved. Here was the general pollution level, then there, then there, then there. I mean, I can't see because you can look at the PowerPoint here. All right, we're immensely better. And that's why it's basically have a max who's going, "Oh, it's never as polluted as now. It's heinous." You're delusional, and that's bad because see, they're delusional. They don't accept reality. Most people, as we're going to see, will think the United States is the most polluted country in the world. If we were, it'd be a lot worse than that. Not as today. Mass amounts of pollution. That's I'm not even going to say it, Cuyahoga River, something like that. Cleveland. These catch a fire. That is the fire of the river burning from the pollution on the river. Stunningly. This is from 2010. Look at that, it's 2010. Can you believe that? That is stunning. If you swam the Cuyahoga in 70, people wondered if you were sane. I don't think this. No, it's just. If I swim this in 1970, people say, "Are you insane? Did you suddenly suffer damages?" You do it now, boom, you're perfectly fine. It was clean. It was doing good. The black and outlines. You can do that now. People don't know. It was 70%, 30% pollution in 1970, 1% now for rivers. People don't realize any of those benefits because, it's never been bad as it is now. Never as bad as it is now. It's like, We're so much better pollution. It's ridiculous. In fact, the only time you get things going worse pollution is when you give exemptions or you gain results, which we're doing now to make green energy look better, but it creates pollution, which means it's not green. In fact, it's worse than that. I do some of these examples so you can understand. It's it's there. These are the 10 most polluted rivers in the world. You went and measured them, found out here's toxic waste, here's pollution waste, here's stuff from people, and they measured it. You notice none of those rivers are in any rich country. A country as powerful and rich, none of them are there. None of them are in any rich country. Oh, the rich countries have big rivers. We get the Missouri, Mississippi nexus. In fact, the Missouri, Mississippi, Ohio, so many rivers feed into those three, and they go down to New Orleans. That is huge. We don't have this mass level pollution. What are they doing? They're measuring by different standards, which is crippling. Okay, when you're dealing with economics, we want the same standard of measure. I want to reduce pollution. To reduce pollution, I need to be measuring and know what it is accurately. No gaming, no lying, no trying to make things look better because I have an agenda. I want to reduce pollution or reduce the level to which it's most beneficial for the population. To do that, I know a few things. What is the actual level of pollution, what we actually have? What is the pollution per person, which some people call it pollution footprint? And here's an interesting one. How much pollution do you actually generate per dollar generated? In other words, how much damage do you do per dollar generated? So, for example, the average Mexican in Mexico generates about 80% on the personal level, the individual level, of the amount of waste the average American does, which is kind of strange because the average American has an income about 5 times that of the average Mexican. And so, that I measure by dollar generated, because when you do it by dollars, because that tells you how efficient you really are at reducing pollution. Ideally, I want to have like lots of dollars generated. Pollution per dollar generated is like 0.0001, stuff like that, which means it's insignificant. That's the item. We must measure the same standard to know. Okay, watch out for people's proxies. Watch out people's ideologies have objectives, something else they're usually cloaking the environment in. In fact, the guy who founded, Greenpeace is, excruciated from them now because he's got in a fight because of these policies that were not measuring pollution and trying to reduce pollution. They were trying to create using pollution as a way to create a utopia. Because if we don't solve everything, pollution will come back. But the social policies you want have nothing to do with pollution, and they don't work. But a lot of ideologies will use proxies. Proxies something else instead of. You don't know what my opinion will be. You may ask my wife because she's a proxy for me. So we act the same way. But a lot of people use proxy. In many places when you hear students say, we're the most polluted country, why they say that? They do GDP. Well, obviously, you have the biggest economy. You must be polluting more. And then they actually do that. Which is, what's the word? Oh, yes, stupid. Because you don't need to use proxies. We can actually measure the amount of pollution being generated. The only time you use proxies is when you can't measure something like that. But using proxies because they want to change the economy and hurt people. Again, U.S. students told the U.S. is the most polluting country, which is a lie. They will measure by different standards. Those are a killer. Over on the right, this goes back a decade, but top 10 polluting cities in the world. 7 in China, 2 in India, and 1 in Mexico City is in the Western Hemisphere. That's because Mexico City is a huge city, tens of millions of people, and it's in a bowl. There was the old volcano has created a large bowl that the city sits in, which makes it more difficult to get rains. But that Mexico City has problems. These things But none in the United States. In fact, the two U.S. cities that make it, one is Hanford, Washington, which is where they built some piece of the bomb and some refining for uranium at the end during World War II. You know what they have in Hanford? Men, when they get to my age, have twice the rate of thyroid cancer. And that's the reason it got on the list. Krasnodar, Russia. Seen a picture of that already. They openly dump in the Russian Soviet Industrial Revolution. They dumped waste in the river. The waste stayed, and it contaminated such that only about 1 out of every 4 children, even today, are born healthy in Krasnodar. Well, wait a minute. In fact, they had Hanford above that. I'll be honest. I'm 60. Either of my 8 and my 9 children, only 2 would have been healthy, and the other 7 have really tough birth defects, diseases, stuff like that, trauma, physical damage. Well, I have thyroid cancer now. I'm gonna be honest. I'm taking the thyroid cancer because why? My kids live. No one would say that Hanford is more polluted, but they did because they need some American cities in the top 100. They say they had to go for some measurement standards. Ideology endangers a clean environment. Again, we got to message people often cloak their objectives in environmentalism because no one will oppose saving the whales or making clean water. Notice that global warming and global cooling have the same cause, human beings polluting, and the same solution. Give the government more power. I'm going to borrow for NASA and Space Command, both of whom have had people in tie-up who've been revealed to be communists. But this says only communism can save us from global warming. Really? No, they both said it. It's like this is after the wall came down. We learned about the economy, stuff like that. They look like I said black men term. They said communism. In fact, there was a purge of lieutenant colonels and colonels in the U.S. military several years ago, when one of them pointed out most of the generals we have are communists. They want government control of everything and directed by them because they just got down. And so why do it? Because it gives them power. Again, global warming, global decent. Time magazine from 2 different ages. 77 and 2000s. Nuts. The ice age is coming. There's nothing we can do to stop it. I have a dozen books written in the 70s when I was young, when I was a kid. Adventure stuff, something like that, in which it's global cooling. It is accepted, proven. There is a consensus. It's all global cooling. Oh, well, then the pollution got bad and it's global warming. No, not being cruel. I'm pointing out the difficulty here. The fact is they both have the same solution: massive government control of the economy. This one is a brutal. I pick on the green movement, the global warming and stuff like that, because of the fact of their damage, not good environmental laws. This one is brutal. No dissent allowed. You can't say it's wrong. You can't say you disagree because they say what? You'll be punished then. But then we're not dealing with the real problem. What has occurred? Why is it occurring? What's it? No. We have an accepted, agenda, and we can punish them. And they're doing this a lot of times because the fact of no dissent means my policies win. But then you don't know what? You don't know reality because you don't allow, debate and truth. Because again, it's easier to shut down my opposition than to outthink them, out-debate them, out-talk them, and stuff like that. When I can shut them down, everybody's going to be quiet because why? Hey, you dead, honey. That's why I find it funny when people say Trump's a fascist. If Trump's a fascist, he wouldn't have lost the 2000 election because why? 2020 election, because it would be what? I'm a fascist now, Mr. Me. So I'm gonna be able to do a fascist do. Arrest my opposition, execute people as mean. And again, it's just I'm pointing out that difficult, that wanting to punish people who don't agree because it's a way of shutting them up. Fake that University of East Anglica, they weren't getting climate temperatures rising. And they said, well, for the good of the human race, we're going to change all these numbers we've had so people can tell temperatures. So they can say, see, it is causing temperatures to rise. I know it's kind of silly, but that one. So, but they said people should be fired. In fact, when someone leaked it from East Anglica, they demanded the English government fire that person, hunt them down and get them out of a job, put them in jail because, well, what we're doing is so great. It allows us to lie because we need to lie to achieve it. Really. Not really about to kill, but a number of times these things you allow indulgences. Now, indulgences, when you commit a sin, you can pay money and get out of the sin. To a certain degree in the modern day, that is true with a number of the alien races that they're reckoning being and stuff like that. Is, you get indulgence. If I'm rich, I apologize. What is my youngest has been having a cantankerous time, so she wakes up a number of times during the night and it gets to me. So I apologize. Okay, back to you strike quantum law because people are rich get exemptions. I picked on Harrison Ford. I picked on Greta Thunberg. Well, they're rich. They get an exemption. They can do what they want. Well, heck, I'll pick on a former politician, Vice President Al Gore. He used more electricity and generated more pollution on his presidential estate because his father built him the Gore presidential estate decades ago, back in the 70s. He said, my boy's going to be president. Thank God we avoided that problem. But, when he's not there, Al Gore was actually in 1 month was burning more energy than the average American did in a year. When he went out to me, he goes, no, it's all good. People use that. Because he's what? Him and his family are one of the good people. They are superior. They have a right to goodies. Again, fudge numbers. This one was great. A Yale report on the environment in the North actually said it was doing one of those human development indexes. What do people feel like? How good they feel and stuff like that. Oh, look, by these reports, Cambodia, Mexico, does it, says had better, by the report, better standards of living because they're more content with their life. Really, does Cambodia have an illegal American problem? No. But these places have an illegal American problem. I'm not being cruel. I'm pointing out in terms of, they gained it. So you got a lot of weird, non-measurable standards. Many social sciences use different standards for different people to get the politically proper result. So what we used to call when I was young, politically correct result. Kind of like when the gay guy voted against a woman from Miss California because she said she believed in marriage between male and female. And he goes, that's stupid. He used those bad words for women and used another bad word for women. She should know her place. And there is only one answer to this question. That's the politically correct answer, not B and use the bad word again. Should know it. The funny thing is, this one was done by, Trump was running that, Miss Universe or whatever. I mean, Miss USA. It's one of the reasons I didn't fully trust Trump because he allowed this to happen. Tom Hanks. I'm picking Tom Hanks. He's controversial all over here. I'm picking out this one. He's the Pacific War. He goes, it was a racist war of American aggression against the poor Japanese people. Is he smoking dope? Did he fall on his head one too many times making something recently? I know I'm being mean. It's the fact of we didn't want to go to war with Japan. We wanted to be left alone. They attacked us. It wasn't U.S. aggression. CNN, less than a decade ago, they did the thing on the Cold War, said, oh, they had Joe Stalin, but we had Joseph McCarthy. He was so much worse than Stalin. Show me the 20-odd million dead bodies. Grapevine say. Like, it's brutal. Resource depletion. This is a last section. This is a different one. This I put it with depletion because it's an end of the world item. We'll run out of resources. We'll consume all resources and we'll be crushing the earth like an empty can shell because there's no resources left. The earth is a finite sphere and resources are thus limited. This has often led to lifeboat analogy, which is a horrible analogy. Well, see, in lifeboats, they share everything, and then the most honorable person, i.e. the government, will dole out everybody something equally so we all have something. Well, see, the thing about doing that is a lifeboat, you die. You disappear. A lifeboat is there to keep you alive until a ship finds you and rescues you. So the concept behind this a lot of times is the government wants to control all the natural resources to make sure we get for to save people. It's amazing how well the government's going to live and how people connect to the government are going to get what? The natural resources. This one, I got picking this guy in a few places here, and I'll pick him again. We talk overpopulation. The population bomb. This guy just died recently, which means the IQ of the Earth went up, the average IQ of Earth went up, and the average IQ of hell went down. Because he advocated forced elimination, sterilization of people. Now, he wrote this book in 1968. Oh, the world's ending. There are too many people. We're being flooded by human beings. We need to stop them and kill them off and beat those little babies dead. Yeah, he said stuff like that. And he said, because if we don't, it's going to be the great starvations of the 1970s. Well, his first book said, in the 1970s, there'll be great starvations. And then when you hit the 80s, there'll be the great die-off, which billions of people die because they can't live in our squander mania thing. The only places that had mass starvations were places that were basically ruled by governments, their own high-end governments, or the socialists who did this, and it still required readings. It still required readings. In this book, he said the government should allocate all resources, make it all fair and just. Meaning he should, because he's a better brain. In other words, what's he doing? He's reducing the human population of the peasants, us, and he's nobility, so he can have different standards. The bet. Now, when he was saying it was going to run out, there was an economist. Oh, thank you, an economist. All saying economists. Julian Simon. Julian Simon goes, you know what, Ehrlich, you're an idiot. You think we're running out of everything. I say we're not. It's like, everything's being used up. You're just a fool. He goes, let's have a bet. If we're running out of resources, prices will rise. Because we're running out of resources. So we're going to be able to make fewer things and stuff like that. So resources go in, prices go up, we're paying more. So he said, well, let's make a bet. And he goes, we'll have a bet with Julian Simon. Julian Simon makes the bet with Ehrlich. He said, if 3 of the 5 goods go up in price, you win. If 3 more of the 5 goods go down in price, I win. And so they agreed on, okay, we're going to try that. The interesting thing is Simon let Ehrlich pick the 5 commodities they were going to use to judge if they were getting scarce. No, see, he didn't have any hand. He said, go ahead and you pick them. And he did. He went to consult all the science departments, stuff like this. Said, which one's running out? Which one do we need? Which one's really expensive and rare? He did all that. And so what happened? They failed. So he challenged Ehrlich to a bet. Ehrlich would pick the 5 goods. Again, if 3 or more rose, Ehrlich wins. It's 3 more decline. Simon wins. It was going to go a decade. Simon won the bet. It was going from 1980 when he made the bet to 1990. The price of everything of the 5 items fell on an average of 57%. They fell. Think about that. It was things got cheaper. They got better. We got more of it. But the resource didn't run out. Ehrlich and Francis Ehrlich, he paid off the bet to Simon, but he didn't ask the important question: why was I wrong? He was still full of himself, what he wanted to do. He said, doesn't matter, I'm still right. That's horrible. In fact, Ehrlich in 2009, in an interview, it's repeated again in the 2020s, before he died, he said, if anything, the population bomb was too optimistic. We're dying. The world's being wiped out. You must give me absolute control to save everybody. Because I was too optimistic. It's much worse than you all think. He's a lying sack of poo-poo. Because in his first book, he said it was more optimistic. It was too optimistic, too good about the future. Dude, you predicted to be the mass starvation of the 1970s. You predicted there'd be great die-offs in the 1980s, in which 1 or 2 billion people die off. It didn't happen. Excuse me, but he says his book was too optimistic. He's got a strange idea of optimistic, that's all I can say. In fact, the only place that suffered those things were ones which had massive government control. Oh, I'm going to go next slide. Okay, why did Ehrlich lose? Now, Ehrlich didn't win, but he says, I'm still right, doesn't matter. It's okay, I win, da da da. Not listening. Simon collected his money, laughed at Ehrlich's ideology, and Ehrlich's ideology scared him. Because keep in mind, Ehrlich views people as almost like insects that need to be exterminated. Well, what do you think the government's going to exterminate first? The weak and infirm, because why? They don't produce anything. Again, keep in mind, this massive pressure. Iceland has no children born with Down syndrome. In fact, in the United States, only about a third of children who are diagnosed with Down syndrome in utero are actually, born. The other 2/3 they're killed off. They're usually killed off by abortion. So they changed it back pretty quick. But see, Socrates might say early psychology will never allow him to see the truth or to learn or grow or adapt because he's got his answer. It was basically government control of the economy for him and his people become his friends. Lester Thoreau, a neo-Keynesian who agreed with Ehrlich, this is why I have Lester Thoreau. He's neo-Keynesian, and I have one of the prominent neo-Keynesians. Is he believed Ehrlich was right. He wrote articles in the late 70s, in the early 80s, saying Ehrlich was right. This is going to happen, and it didn't happen. None of it happened. Prices collapsed and stuff like that. He said, "Okay, why was I wrong? I thought government control of all resources would be good. That didn't work. I thought we were running out of all the resources. That didn't happen." And so, that's a brutality. So Thoreau says, now, I said, Simon knows what's going to happen. Thoreau realized, okay, we made assumptions, we're going to run out of resources, but we didn't. He goes, okay, why are my assumptions wrong? And so Thoreau now opposes government control of mining, oil. He wants environmental pollution down, but he wants the private sector to run resources, resource generation, resource creation, stuff like that, because they will find a better way of doing things. They will seek it. So supply and demand solves resource problems better than the government does. I was reading an article today, which was they were talking about somebody, and it was funny because the person at the same time was complaining about overbearing government causing damage, and because it's hurting them or something, and then complain the government should take command of the larger economy for the good of everybody. Well, if you're saying the government can't, do this little simple function, why are they bothering, you know? Okay, so market solves resource depletion problems. This one's easy. Sheep. A lot of times economists will say, are chicken endangered? No. Why? This is going to Anna's been pointing out, we did saving critters, is because why? They serve function. Prices send signals of what is needed, and markets respond, they reply. I mentioned before earlier, attempts to farm rhino and elephants were very successful. You've got larger elephant and rhino populations, but the environmentalists went after that to get it canceled, and thus both became endangered again. So prices will tend to send signals of what is needed, and markets respond. It doesn't just keep shifting in because everything. No. And these other things, firms and individuals seek to reduce costs internally. How can I reduce my cost? Suppliers will get more efficient in the production and delivery of the good. These two red points there. Command economies of heavy socialism, will often waste resources. And the reason they waste resources, one, there's nothing to keep them efficient, and there's no way of measuring. And then, I guess you could say a third thing is the fact of wasting resources, doing bad ideas, show you how powerful a politician is. I'm not being cruel with that, because if you can get something stupid passed, it shows you're strong. And another time, that occurs. So government officials will waste resources to show how powerful they are. Again, suppliers get more efficient. The government does not, but suppliers will. Technology increased efficiency of production will happen. Markets will naturally develop technology that will solve the problem without the resource. In fact, one of the resources of the five picked by Ehrlich was mercury, because he used in a lot of scientific and industrial applications, because it's liquid, it's a metal. Well, because mercury was dangerous, we got rid of mercury, restricted it until we started going green again. Then we say mercury pollution from green does not hurt people. It doesn't work that way. The market, because mercury got expensive, the market found other ways to make a good that does mercury's function. And so the economy grew faster because people would solve it. Markets will seek to solve a problem to reduce costs for people. Markets develop alternative goods. It's new technologies are making things, alternative goods. I kind of overlap them. I apologize. The profit incentive solves these things. Okay, this is the end of the section. You guys have all been good. I'm impressed with you. Great talking with you.